Hello, dear ones. Welcome to another conversation on the different shades and shapes of love. The kind of conversation I think we must have more of. As always, before we start, can I invite you to take a moment of centering and breathing with me so that we can do a pause together? Sit down with your back up, drop your shoulders, relax, close your eyes, breathe. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. And now listen with your heart. Today's shade of love is adapt. Adapt was the tough love I was thrown into when what I thought was permanent changed right before my eyes. When the stock market crashed on Wall Street in 1987, I was rudely introduced to the impact of globalization in the most intimate way: financial instability. Infamously called Black Monday, the world plunged into the abyss of recession. Baba's construction business saw to collateral damage. Although he struggled with this loss, I was immensely inspired by his grit and determination to provide for the family by taking on small jobs like sewing factory gloves, string plastic bags, and many others. He later became a taxi driver. His vivid promise to Wei and I that he would do whatever was needed to see us through our education still reverberates in my ears today. Ma also took on more clients for her own base dressmaking services. I, on the other hand, gave tuition for my own spending money. I learned from Ba that we only fail when we give up, especially if ego or face value was the concern. No job was too low for him as long as he was making an honest living. He was very clear about what mattered to him and what kept him walking with his chin up. I'm filled with so much love for my Ba reading the story again. He is truly someone who has demonstrated an immense ability to adapt and move on to a new ground, to anchor into whenever he faces an upheaval. Whether in this Black Monday recession, when he overcame his cancer in his 60s, and yet later stood up to move when he was immobilized from a terrible car accident in his 70s. So the walking palms came to mind to pair this shade with. Forced by soil erosion, the walking palms seek new ground, which may sometimes be as far away as 20 meters from its original location in order to establish new roots. The image of my beloved Papa going about every day in stoic silence, moving quietly from sewing the factory gloves to stringing the plastic bags for drinks at hawker centers, is still so vivid. And as I'm recalling that period of time, it just dawned on me that Ba never once did project his frustration, his fear, worry, or for that matter, any negative emotions on us, but he must have carried all of this. I'm not sure why I never asked him, but I do wonder what a blow it must be to his self-esteem and dignity to not be able to provide for his family adequately. Perhaps his coping mechanism was rowing his problems and frustrations away relentlessly and rigorously on that strangely out-of-place second-hand rowing machine in his room. I can actually still see this machine today, actually. I used to think of this as larger than life in our HDB flat. My siblings and I may be different in so many ways, but I think we all share Ba's and Ma's work ethic. Yet I can't help but think that my parents have inadvertently role model agency and dignity for us when we were navigating through this financially and emotionally challenging period as a family. All three of us also carry Ba's incredible ability and adaptability. I am so grateful for this, actually, in ways I cannot really put into words right now. So, when I was thinking of who I would like to have a conversation with on this shade of love regarding dignity, agency, and poverty, I immediately thought of my new young friend, Zulhaqem Zulkifli, who has an incredible tale of twists and turns himself, and whose father is also central to much of how he has been shaped. Not yet 30. In fact, he just told me he would like to stretch his 20s for as long as he can. Zul has a bag full of experience, from sleeping in void decks to collecting cardboards to now studying his master's in Oxford, where he's actually right now zooming in from for today's conversation. I remember reading about him in the papers because it's clearly newsworthy as a quintessential Singapore boy made good story. And I also remember being proud and also very curious about his choice to pursue Buddhist studies. And I think the first time we met was at the conversation we had at A Good Space about budget 2021, right? And through your sister too, Zuleika.
Yeah.
So Zul, thank you so much for bravely saying yes to being part of this podcast experiment to discuss love and to call on love more, right? As we look at the issues of our time.
Thank you so much, Athia.
How are you feeling?
I'm doing good. Yeah, there's a lot to be thankful for in life, and
Yay.
I'm just very grateful to be here in this current present moment, and hopefully having this beautiful conversation pan out over this next few minutes.
Thank you. I'm sure it will. And look at that smile on your face. Now it's I'm so hopeful. So like me, Zul, your father, like mine, are such men of heart and wisdom, right? Can you share a little about your story and also your dad and how, as I mentioned earlier about agency and dignity, how do you see agency and dignity regarding the circumstances of your family?
I think I'll just start by maybe talking a bit about my dad. So, Papa is a person who doesn't talk much about his problems. He's like, he belongs to this generation of grit that, I'm the man, I shall tank this out. Whatever problems I have, I will not tell my kids or my wife or anything, and for us especially, he won't tell us because, being a single dad, for him, yeah, it was really difficult to get any sort of like emotional response from him, and at times, I do ask him like, hey, you okay? Or it seems quite tough, your boss just scolded you or something, and he'll be like, it's just life, and it's just this weird glossing over that he does. I guess when it comes to agency, well, at least for my dad, at least, he, as a person, I saw a lot of transformation that he had to go through. So of course he was battling his grief and sadness over, the whole divorce proceedings and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's one. But at the same time, now he had to change himself. He can no longer be this strong man, but he also has to cultivate like maternal instincts. He has to try to ask his kids, like he has to fit in this mother role as well, and that's something really, I thought, really quite amazing, because like, for a man who has been living his life in this way for so long, and then suddenly told to, the circumstances are such that he has to sort of soften his approach, because that's what his children need. I think that sort of so that sort of like, I saw agency in that, like agency not in just, usually when we talk about agency, it's always some kind of like directedness stemming from ourselves, that we want to do something, we want to change something. But agency is also upon the agent itself. The agent himself or herself has to do some kind of change in order to enact or manifest those changes in the outside world. So and that was what I saw, and in some ways that's actually harder, because we are so habituated by our daily experiences, by our comforts, to step out of it, and to be forcefully stepped out of it is something really, really it takes a lot of courage, and
That's
that,
absolutely spot on. Yeah. I think
yeah.
the courage
So
aspect is absolutely spot on.
as for agency within me and my siblings, I
Yeah.
guess we sort of took our cues from our dad, really. And there is like this saying in our family where we say, like, you can't decide um the circumstances that you are,
Mm.
you have no choice in the circumstances that are presented to you, but you always
Mm.
have a choice in how you wish to adapt to it. And you know
Mm.
and that's
Mm.
how most of us, me, my sisters, my brother, we have always thought of ourselves like, okay, sure, life is hard, life is painful, but so what? And so it almost comes with a tinge of rebelliousness, like, I don't want this for my life, and we're gonna try to do something about it. And if
Mm.
we fail, because it's not always a journey of there are no rose petals that line the path
Of
in such a
course.
situation. There's a lot
Yeah.
of thorns also, so there are many times where we try and we fail. People,
Mm.
which is something I also want to touch on, like the fact that when people see my so-called successes, they see the
Mm.
successes as it is, but they don't know that the, for that one piece of success that you perceive that I have, there was like 100 over failures that I had to go through, 100 over rejections that I had to go through, 100
Mm.
hurdles that I had to overcome, just to
Mm.
reach to that point. And
Mm.
you know it's something that we don't want to talk about much, because I guess we live in a society that sort of like, and I think maybe this is human nature, that we glorify successes, but I also think we should glorify failures, because
Yeah.
failures are really important. Without failures, we really cannot have whatever success that we have today. So I guess that's
Yeah.
that's really, really important.
And that's a really that's a really important and insightful take on agency and dignity. And I see agency and dignity also being very closely interconnected,
Yep.
right? Because to be able to exercise agency is in some way, you know, retaining that dignity in us, right? That self worth, that self esteem in us as well, despite and in spite of the circumstances that
Yep.
we're given. And so true about us as a society. And in these times, tending to only celebrate successes, but not to nuance those successes and acknowledge how those successes come about, right?
Right.
And that actually means to look behind the successes to celebrate also the failures. And in Chinese, we talked about failure being the mother of success, right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
And without failures, failure is the way to birth success. It's actually what the proverb means, right? Calling
Yeah.
it the
Yeah. Right.
mother. So I think that's a really important point that we'll try to come back to in terms of the way we look at failures and how that is linked to our education system and perhaps even our brand of meritocracy, right? So one of the things I read in the Mothership article, Zul, was that you shared with the reporter that your dad would say to you, the next time you think that you are all high and mighty, remember that you used to sit here and pick up rubbish. Do you
Yeah.
think a humble background keeps one humble? And 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 if you don't think it does, what will?
Right. So I guess, so this is actually one of the, for those who don't know what Anthea is talking about. So this refers to a point of time in my life where I was basically picking up cardboard boxes in the central rubbish bin centers, or in the industrial sites. And so what me and my dad would do is, like, on weekends we would go and collect rubbish, and basically collect rubbish. And in this really, stinky bin centers, and then we'll collect that and sell it for a sum of money, and that money will actually fund my pocket money for university. Actually, so my university funding was partly funded by cardboard money. So that's something I wasn't really able to convey. But there was a day where I remember this day because it was really hot. So we usually work from the prime hours of 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. where the sun it's at its absolute glory. And it was too hot. So it was so hot that we sat by the side of the curb, and he bought me a canned drink, and we started drinking, and then he told me that next time so he first said, like, I hope you remember this moment in your life. And I said, yeah, I mean, it can't possibly go any lower. I mean, it could, but I was just at the point I was thinking, like, yeah, I mean, this is already quite low. How much lower you want me to go? I'm literally picking rubbish. So he was like, yeah, but I hope you remember it. And I say, why? I mean, I don't think I would forget it. I wouldn't forget the smell, at least. And then he said, well, next time when you do, make it big or something, and or you attain a high position, or you become rich, or whatever that is, you I hope you do remember that there was a point of time in your life where you were sitting here in this absolute low place, picking rubbish in the stinky place that no one wants to go near you. And I said, and of course I just kept quiet. I didn't know what was he alluding to at that point of time. And later on, I had to piece it out for myself. So when we were watching the news and whatnot, and then he'll see some figure, some figure who sort of like comes up, presenting him or herself as being, coming from this humble background and all that. But then for some reason or other, they tended to be quite, even seem to be rather arrogant in their ways. And then I sort of like, when I was watching that, I said, so was this what you were trying to tell me? And then he said, yeah, I mean, no, there would come upon a time, like he told me, you're a smart boy, and I have no, you are smarter than whatever I can be. You are smarter, you are more than whatever I had ever imagined for myself. Truth be told, I just wanted you to just get your diploma and start working, but you have exceeded far further than what my small expectations were. I'm just telling you that there will come a point in time where you might think that you're very high and mighty, but actually, I hope you do remember that where you came from, and this was really important to me. And then to go back to your question, do I think whether a humble background is necessarily the cause for someone to be humble? Well, yes and no. So I would say yes, if a person is always reflective of their where they came from, and not just using it for some kind of to get some clout, or some kind of to qualify themselves for certain things. But in my experience, and I've met a few people who do initially come from humble backgrounds, and who have made it. And I find that sometimes, and in fact, not sometimes, most of the times, coming from a humble place actually sometimes just entrenches the view that there's some kind of like individual exceptionalism that's at work, that I have attained all this because of my efforts, and if I can make it, how come you can't? And then they just end up, it's quite tragic really, because they just end up proselytizing this weird understanding, and going around, and even maybe it's a kind of self-hate even, where you sort of start seeing faults in people where they can't be really be faulted. And in my experience, at least, and this is quite a personal observation, most of the times coming from a humble background, usually just and having made it. So coming from a humble background and having made it, in some ways makes has a tendency to make someone sort of worse off. It's not a what I'm going at is that it's not a guarantee that you're gonna be humble.
Exactly. And I
It's
think
not a
what I'm
guarantee.
hearing is that just saying that you're coming from a humble background doesn't necessarily therefore imply, first of all, that you understand, the challenges of folks who are right now, struggling.
Yeah,
And so that's kind of trying to gain association, right, by claiming that similar background. And I think the other thing is also, um, you know the other flip side of it is, just because you had come from a well-to-do background doesn't also mean that you will
exactly,
be arrogant or you will be looking down,
exactly.
right? So I think,
Oh my
I
God.
yeah, I think that two
Yeah,
parts of it is it's really important. I
I'm
certainly
glad.
don't.
I'm glad.
Mm,
I'm glad that you brought that up because like a lot of my friends, they come from really well-to-do backgrounds, and I've always, there are days where I just sit down at night. So this happens at midnight onwards, and I just wonder to myself, and this is like a self-reflection moment where I just go about thinking, oh my God, I feel so blessed. Like I'm such an insignificant person, but all these people, they just want to be friends with me, and it's just this like wallowing myself in a sense of blessing, so that I may be grateful.
yeah.
And I do, sometimes I can tell you that people who come from privileged backgrounds or who are more well off, I resonate more with them because of
Mm,
of how humble they are in interacting with others who are not well off,
mm,
and how
mm.
understanding they are, and you know privilege itself is not, it's not a sin. It's not something that you can help.
Yes.
You don't decide these things. You are just, somewhat born into it. You find yourself in these kind of circumstances. But you know what you can sort of be faulted for is, not being aware of it, or
Yeah.
trying to you know pretend that things are equal for everyone when it's not. And
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
a good distinction, because I find that a lot of people that I've met, they do ask me like, is being privileged really wrong? Is me having privilege really wrong? No, it's not. No one can be faulted. No one can be faulted for being rich. No one can be faulted for being poor. But it's just circumstances. It's just that, you just have to be very mindful of how you present yourself, and how those relationships take place between you and another person who might not come from the same background.
and
So I
and to be
think,
aware of it, right?
yeah,
I think it's
awareness.
really important that you said that. In fact, many of your friends from privileged background are humble, and that some who come from humble background, uh, revel in their individual exceptionalism, that they
Yeah.
choose to see themselves as different, and
Yeah,
that
and it's worse
actually.
in some ways because
Exactly.
they
So,
become the benchmarks of other people. Like, it's
mm,
a kind of like arrogance, even like,
exactly,
I am the
exactly.
benchmark of how you should be.
What is possible, right? And
Yeah,
I think, so ultimately, in being humble, it doesn't have anything to do with the background, necessarily. It
no,
comes from, how do you keep living in empathy? How do you keep listening? How do you keep relating? And how do you keep sort of, yeah, not imagining yourself to be different, but to continue to look at, what binds us, right?
yeah,
What is common. So yeah, no, that's important. So just because we come from humble background doesn't mean that we are humble. It's
exactly.
it's more important to know how we stay humble and not just because of the background. All right. How do you think this has shaped you, right? As a person, as Zulhaqem? How have all these experiences, what you have seen from your dad, what you have had to go through, living with, the circumstances, and at times really challenging. And I know this is not a word that in Singapore we like to use. But, these circumstances were circumstances of poverty. And I hope that's not a word that you have an issue with. If I actually
No, I don't.
Okay. So
we should normalize it. Actually,
we should,
I feel.
right? I know. Otherwise, it's just so invisible, and we just pretend that there isn't any poverty.
Yeah.
How do you think all this have shaped you into the person you are today?
Well, I suppose humility comes easier for me now. Like, if I were to think of myself in the past, when things were relatively more stable, which was like a very short period of time, I wasn't really as mature at the point of time. I mean, I still don't count myself as being very wise, but I would like to think that I am wise enough to know that there are a lot of things that I don't know. So that's one. Yeah, so you realize that, I guess as a poor person, as a person who grows up in poverty, who is viewed through the lenses of poverty by others, which is something that happens more often than people would like to talk to. It's just that maybe people who are in my circumstances or such in poverty don't really talk about it, but we do feel there is a certain way that we are being viewed as, and and I see this happening to me as well. Like you could be in a social gathering with your friends, so your friends ask you out, hey, let's go catch a movie, or get food at this new restaurant or cafe that just opened up, and then you always have to say like, oh guys, I can't go, and then like and you say and they'll ask you about why, it's very cheap, it's just $10, and like, well, $10 is a lot for me. It's like one day's worth of like meals for me, $10, as opposed to that just one eat out at your cafe. And it sort of like makes people uncomfortable even, so when I realize this a lot. So whenever I talk about my circumstances and and I present, so it's not something that I do intentionally, it's just that circumstances are such that I always come in bringing a different story or a different narrative, and that disrupts the flow because everyone just assumes that everyone can afford this, everyone can we can go do this whatever we want whenever we want it. Whereas for me, it's like circumstantial. If I have enough, sure, I'll join you, but if I don't, then I don't.
And that actually brings us to this brand of meritocracy, right? Where when you don't make it, when you can't make it, when you're poor, it's actually it's on you, right? It's because you have not done enough, you're not working hard enough, and all of that. And this brings me to me, right? And I'm going to share in this story. I must say that in some ways, I've always considered myself to be middle class when I was growing up, Zul. And despite the obvious challenges that my family went through, obviously in the story that I shared, right? And the grit and determination and hard work that my papa definitely put in.
Yeah.
It was really not lost on me though that I don't remember having ever to worry about not having no food on the table, nor new clothes, no materials for school, right? And part of that I think is because despite that period of challenge, we started with more than enough, right? If you go way back, we started more than enough as part of an extended family who own land. My papa had access to education. In fact, he's 82 this year, but he actually went all the way to senior Cambridge, which was considerably privileged during his time, actually, right? So I may, I may look at it that way, but I would like to ask, given what you just shared, right, how there is this issue of equity as well, right? As much as at that point, we were struggling, right, financially and all that, but we started on a different footing, and therefore perhaps that helped us bounce back. I have often asked that question because we have access to certain resources, right? From where we came from. So what would you say to that, in terms of the class divide, and maybe how do we understand equality in opportunity versus equality in conditions, right? That you start with. In other words, equality versus equity lah.
Yeah. So for my family, like, they've always been poor. So that's pretty much it. So from my granddad struggle, my dad struggle, we're just from a line of struggling people, trying to and sometimes looking around me in my community, in my neighborhood, a lot of people assume that, this so we take it as something given that wealth can be inherited, but we don't want to talk about how poverty can also be inherited. And that's what I see a lot, poverty that's inherited. Most of the people around me in my neighborhood, in people I know, people I work with in Project Hills, second, third generation poor. And at some point you just ask yourself, like, oh well, there's privilege that can be inherited, but there's also underprivilege that's also inherited. And
it's such a strong point that you just made, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, the more you talk to people, the more I talk to these people, the more I realize that a lot of their life choices, a lot of the choices they had to take, were directly predicated on, the choices that were made before them and before them and before their great grandparents or whatnot. And it's just a chain of self-perpetuating, circumstances for which, they really didn't have much control with. So it's really sad that they are then later made or painted in a light such that they are responsible for, the choices that they have made.
And then worse, being stigmatized, right? Worse,
exactly.
Yeah, being stigmatized, yeah.
And then you are seen as this really bad person, who doesn't work or doesn't work hard enough and all that. But which is really untrue. If you come to the rest of it, the most hardworking people are actually, look, this pandemic is tanked by our frontline workers. And frontline workers doesn't mean just, nurses or whatnot. It's also our cleaners. Who are, overwhelmingly represented by the elderly and those who are in the low income bracket. And if that's not hardworking, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
How more hardworking, while we are, sitting in the comforts of our homes and all that, we have, all these people going out, cleaning the houses, cleaning, our estates, cleaning the hawker centers, trying to sanitize places. These jobs are done by people who come from this low income bracket. So I really don't understand why is it such a strange thing to, I really don't understand why is it that they are then labeled as lazy. If anything, one would think that those who are staying at home, are, because I suppose
the idlers. They're the idling.
Yeah, I mean, what you doing? What you doing at home? Like, shouldn't you be like wiping or I don't know, sweeping the corridors or something to sanitize the place?
Right. No, I think that's those are very important questions to ask, right? And I think we all know that there is a deeper and bigger conversation that need to be had, and that is actually when we talked about what you have just sort of laid out and unpacked for us today, really tells us that there's a structural issue here, right? It is not just an individual issue. We cannot conveniently talk about, what we are, broadly categorizing as sort of poverty, and as you said, intergenerational poverty, the class divide, right? We can't just talk about it without, understanding where are the structural cracks and flaws and problems that we need to actually address. And we cannot continue to put the burden on the individuals or certain groups of people within our society, certain communities. I think it's also why, and it actually gets me quite riled up thinking about us coming so far as one of the richest countries in the world, right? And yet that you see 2 or 3, generations, right, of families still living sometimes in the same flat. That's not something that we, as a society should be able to continue to live with in our conscience, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
those are big questions, and you and I don't have the solutions in these conversations to come up with, but I think what we are is putting it out there to the listeners to ponder, to think about. What do you think of the
Oh, can I
individual?
add something?
Yeah, of
Can
course,
I add
please.
something? So something that's also quite close to this issue is also, this whole structural problem is
Mm,
is is the idea that is this obsession, our obsession with statistics. We are
mm,
really and to go back to that CNA article that I read, it was like a breakdown of statistics, and they were saying like, oh, this percentage of that percentage and all these figures and all that.
mm.
I mean, which is good. It's not something that's bad per se, but I think it becomes really problematic when it reaches a point where we worship the numbers more
The
than anything
humans.
ever. The human voices are not heard, and
Yeah.
I feel like personally, and I have experienced this. You can go to help organizations or charities, and then you tell a story, and then they say that, but what do the stats say? They won't even listen to stories, and then I ask why. This is what my sort of like this person is facing or what I am
Mm,
facing, and they'll say like,
mm.
well, these are all anecdotes. They're just anecdotal. It's as though narratives don't matter. And I
Yeah.
think that's really, really problematic. We need to have a balance of both statistics and narratives, because the statistics can only make sense with the context of a narrative. You cannot have, you can't just look at a bunch of figures, a bunch of percentiles and just start, interpreting it as and when you like. There is a context to those figures. And
Exactly.
I think that's where the solution, if this conversation is getting us anywhere, the solutions probably lie in that. And
Yes.
that's something I would really urge listeners to sort of like
Think about, yeah.
think about.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
question as well. Question, and also I think every time you see statistics to not assume that, there aren't human lives, right?
it is
Behind
very
those
much so.
numbers. And I would go a step further, Zul, to say that actually, even if the statistics, are saying that this is a small percentage of people who are struggling, who are in the rental flat, um,
Right.
even if it is, right, which it is, and that's factual,
Yeah.
it does not mean it can be neglected with,
Yeah. It's not
in fact,
invalidated by that.
no, not at all. In fact, in a democracy, it's really important that we do
Yeah.
not leave anyone out, and therefore,
Exactly.
if there are 2%, or 4%, and it doesn't seem like big numbers, then it tells us that we should give more resources, right, to
Right.
change that number, right, to zero, or at least it should be
Exactly.
what we work towards, and so it's both the context, as you say, the narratives, and the lived experiences, because the folks who are on the ground are the experts in the circumstances, in telling
Yeah.
you why they are actually going through the circumstances as they do, not being sort of assumed by some experts,
Right.
that's making
Yeah.
some, theoretical,
Some ivory tower
yes,
discussion.
exactly. But I think also, even based on statistics alone, we need to not think of it just because it's minority or it's negligible,
Yeah.
right? That therefore, we should not. I feel that in a equitable and inclusive society, we should, one way of doing it is to think about completely reframing that, we should actually give more resources to those who have less. Whether or not this percentage is high or not, higher, or is it low or not, we should give more to those who have
Yeah.
less. And I know it's a bit redistributive, but I think it's more than being redistributive. Actually, it's
Yeah.
being it's being
Being
rational,
compassionate.
compassionate, but also rational in distribution. If you think about it, why would
Yeah.
you not lift the ones who don't have, out of the circumstances with the resources that we have, right?
Yep.
So that's at least something out there that we're putting out to the listeners to ponder and to think about. So Zul, as someone who is graduating from the prestigious Oxford University, do you think that this signals a change of circumstances for you? And do you think that you now prove that meritocracy works?
So my own, as you all know, that so this actually happened over a few conversations. So I was in a conversation with a friend, and they said that wow, so you must be like, you are the symbol of how meritocracy works. You've gone through, and I sort of like, when it was announced about the results, and when it came out in the news and all that, I sort of already expected that, well, the meritocracy thing is gonna come out, and it didn't take long. Lo and behold, some of my friends, just started talking to me, isn't that great? Like, this shows that meritocracy work. And I am a bit, truth be told, I'm very uncomfortable with that sort of narrative, and I do explain that yes, in some ways it may work, but I think what is much more important is that I'm an exception, not a norm, and that is very important. That this is something really important. It's not so much to make myself feel special about myself, but more of that
I know.
I am an exceptional case. You shouldn't assume that other people. My fear is that I am going to be used against people who other young people who are in my so-called quote unquote category, and then they are subjected to all these unfair assumptions, unfair evaluations because of myself.
Yeah,
And I don't think
because
that's
it could be
really,
like, if Zul can make it, why can't
yeah,
you? Yeah.
yeah. So I really resist that a lot. So and there has even been a point where I've been reached out to give talks on how to work hard, and you always know that the underlying assumption is that, well, there's this underlying meritocratic sort of principle that's undergirding the sort of presentations that they want me to give. And I've always been straight up and saying that if you expect me to tell people that they can make it if they just work hard, I'm so sorry, but I have to disappoint you, because that's not what I'm going to say. My life, whatever I've achieved so far, even my so-called individual exceptionalism is due to the sacrifices of a lot of people. A lot of people have sacrificed for me to reach where I am, and those sacrifices actually buffed a lot of the hurdles that most of the people in my social class had to overcome. And that's the only reason why I think that I was able to reach where I am. But I'm so sorry to tell you, but sometimes one can work very hard. I know of so many people, so many of my friends who belong to my sort of like circumstances. They work so hard, they work harder than me. Sometimes they work so hard, they cry until they can't cry. But how, when you reach a point, an emotional point where you just get so tired that you can no longer cry. You want to cry, but there's no tears. And then like you look at these people and you just wonder what exactly is going on. They're working hard. By right, if you work hard, the formula is if you work hard, you will get to whatever you want, wherever you want to go to. But what's going on, and at that point of time, that's where I realized that sometimes even working hard is not enough. It's about opportunities, it's about access, it's about and access is not just financial access, it's access to opportunity. Yeah, and but having said that, of course, when it comes to many processes, meritocracy does count. You need to, whenever you want to elect someone to a position or whatnot, they have to have certain skills. That is something that I agree, but I would not agree if you think that that meritocratic process it has to be qualified. It has to be a mindful meritocracy, a meritocracy that recognizes that there were certain privileges that allowed for that blossoming of that meritocracy. And if people don't people who are not able to attain those things, there are also circumstances why they are not able to do that, and that's something, you know, I think I've reached a point in my life where I really don't like to talk so much about equality, because equality seems a bit, you know, a bit overrated, like, at times. Like, what does it even mean?
Yeah, yeah,
equal equal insofar as what where are we starting from? Because we don't,
that's right.
you know, let's not, you know, even like we are all in this phrase, we are all in this together. Are we really all in this
Yeah,
together? Pandemic? I don't think so,
no,
because I
no.
live in the rental estates, you know, in the short period of time that I was back, I live in the rental estates, and all I saw was we are not all in this together, you know.
Yeah,
You don't come to me and tell me like we are all in this together, and, you know, people can work from home freely, people can study at home freely. Well, if some of my neighbors have like 8 people in their household and
exactly.
one room, what are you talking about? We're in this together. You have your own room, you know, your own
Mm,
computer. Some of them don't even have, you
mm.
know, technological divide is also a very big
Yes,
thing.
the
So
digital divide is another major issue that we don't think about. And I think what you just said is true, right? Saying that we are in this together without acknowledging, I mean, even in just this crisis and this pandemic, we can talk about it. We're in the same boat, but actually we're not. We might be in the same storm, but actually we're
yeah,
in different boats, right? Some of our boats
yeah.
are actually way
Some boats
smaller,
are
and
sampan,
some are sampan, some are steamship, right?
some are superstar Virgo. So
Yeah, superstar Virgo.
you
That's
say,
true. Or yeah, Queen Elizabeth. Um, the cruise. So I think this is where we need to sort of have a different type of conversation, right? And not to
right,
sort of
exactly.
sugarcoat and gloss over, like you said. Particularly not in having narratives that are so binary. And certainly not tiptoeing around the difficult and
Right,
challenging terms and conversations that
right,
we must have as a society. One
absolutely.
other thing I think I'm learning so much from having this conversation with you, right? Is also this kind of conversation that we have, right? Knowing that it's easy for me. I mean, I'm sitting here as a Chinese, coming from a family with very different sort of um, resources. And it didn't even come from my parents, my dad's generation, right? The resources that we had, Zul, came from my great grandfather. So we
Right,
already had 3 generations, built up of a certain level of resource that has actually brought me to this generation. And it'll be easy for me to think that right now where I am is because of my own merit. I mean, of course, I will claim what I have done
yeah,
and put in effort for, but I clearly cannot say, with clear conscience that it's all because of my effort that has given me the success or the privilege that I have, right?
right.
Because like I said, I've got 3 generations that have actually built that up. So my biggest learning from this honest conversation with you, Zul, is that we must own our agency to change and adapt, no matter our circumstances. Yet, no matter how high we may have reached, we must remember we didn't get there completely on our own merit, because so many would have sacrificed, whether we know it or not, to allow us to get there. And more importantly, also, you have reminded us, and I think it's a really important reminder for all listeners as well, is that being born into humble beginnings doesn't mean that we remain humble. There's work to be done there. And in relation to the topics, as we do with each episode, we would be sharing these resources with our listeners. But for this particular episode, I thought instead of sharing resources that you can support through donation and or volunteering, which are aplenty and can be found on the National Council of Social Services website, I would like to instead share some of these resources where we can come together to discuss and understand poverty in a more meaningful way that includes listening to individuals and families from the vulnerable communities. You can find some of the links on our show notes and social media posts. I hope that this would be of value for listeners out there. There's a Good Space. So full disclosure, I'm involved with a Good Space. In a Good Space, we bring change makers together to co-create solutions for stubborn issues like inequality and poverty. There's also the Social Collaborative, or socialcollab.sg, as it's called. And last but not least, there's also CAPE, which is the Community for Advocacy and Political Education, a student-run organization based at Yale NUS College here. So yeah, be sure to check them out. And now, let's leave these invitations with you today. How have you adapted yourself in tough situations? What does that say about your values?